So my name is Florian Beutler. I'm a reader in astronomy at Institute for Astronomy at the Royal Observatory here in Edinburgh.
I'm Dylan Robson. I'm a fourth year PhD student at the Royal Observatory of Edinburgh, and I study the X-ray properties of galaxies and clusters. What is it that inspired you to become a scientist?
Yes, so I didn't really, I think I never knew what a scientist does until I was a scientist. So it's not that I knew I want to become a scientist. It's more that in school, I enjoyed math and physics. These were the main subjects which I really thrived in. And the main point here was that you just learned new concepts, and especially in physics, you suddenly learn these concepts which you could apply to all these use cases. As soon as you know Newton gravity, you have suddenly all these processes which you can explain. If you learn thermodynamics, you have all these different how gas works. You can describe all these physical processes very well. So as an applied mathematics field, I think physics was very appealing to me. And then when it came to university, I just followed the subject I liked. I have to admit, when I decided to study physics at university, I had no idea what that actually would lead to, because I don't think I knew what a physicist does. And I think all my parents as well asked, what does a physicist actually do? And I had no good answer to this. So I just followed what I liked. And it was a lucky break, because now looking back at it, if you study physics, you're kind of trained as an all-rounder. So many of my friends who studied with me, they now work for Google or for a hedge fund in finance in London or in New York. And that is all possible because if you are trained in physics, you have a skill which is very, very desired everywhere. So if you don't know what to do, studying physics is actually a good choice. And I didn't know that when I did this, but this is basically how I got into physics. And then, of course, one option is just to follow that path. So as soon as you study physics, you suddenly notice that you can just continue doing this. You can just stay on that path and then do your PhD, do a postdoc, and then eventually start teaching the subject. And that is, I never felt like I want to leave that subject, because I looked, and I definitely kept an open mind. So I did apply for companies and saw what is out there, but I never felt like I should leave what I'm doing right now to follow any career path outside of academia. I didn't quite find it as appealing. I mean, the subjects are still interesting. Even if you work for Google, I think you will still have very interesting problems to solve. But I found the freedom you have in a pure academic setting is just, didn't want to replace that with anything.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a level of not just the research part, but being able to sort of guide it yourself a little bit more that is quite enduring. You said you like the ability to sort of solve problems with these sort of, I guess, not simple set of rules, but a given set of rules. And that's sort of the draw of physics, right? That like you say, it's sort of a very general, you can apply it to a lot of things and solve some problems. So what is it about cosmology in particular that drew you to follow that path? Because obviously that's a very precise thing, and maybe those rules don't always apply everywhere.
I didn't get into cosmology in a direct way. I worked in particle physics during my undergrad. So all during university, I was never really interested in astronomy or cosmology. That, as usually, has to do with the teachers you have. So in particle physics, we had fantastic teachers back at the University in Heidelberg, where I studied. And I did my master thesis in particle physics. But then when it comes, this is when you study the subject, and particle physics is just a very, very kind of appealing subject. It is a fairly solved kind of content. It's an entire subject which is basically solved. So not entirely, but you have a standard model of particle physics is something very different to compare to standard model of cosmology. Standard model of particle physics is very rounded and has solved most of the open questions. And that is very appealing when you learn it. But then when you do research, then you suddenly notice that the open questions are fairly difficult to answer. You need to build things like an LHC to really find the answers to the open questions which are left in that model. And that didn't seem that appealing to me. So when I had to decide what research to do, kind of betting your entire career on this one experiment seemed not that appealing. So I did work in particle physics, and my first research publications are actually in particle physics. But when it then came to the PhD, I really knew that this is not where I want to stay. And then I had a few options to do my PhD. All of them ended up to be actually in cosmology. But I just kept an open mind, and fairly accidentally ended up in cosmology. So I picked the place where I do my PhD mainly for the people I could work with and the place I would live at. And again, I was very, very lucky to have a fantastic supervisor, and then ending up with a subject which really kept me going. And that's why I then also decided to do a PhD in that subject and stayed in it until now.
You mentioned how you sort of moved into going from particle physics to sort of where you wanted to focus your research on something slightly different, and this brought up your moving about. And so you've moved to Edinburgh during this pandemic, which is I guess a strange enough situation for everybody. But how has it been for you coming to a sort of new city? Have you been able to make the most of Edinburgh? Have you been able to experience it, or has it all sort of been a bit weird?
Yeah, weird is a good description. I'm very much looking forward to the end of all of this, the end of the pandemic. I certainly, I mean, like I mentioned to you earlier, I didn't actually go to the observatory more than 2 to 3 times since I'm here, and I'm here for 7 months now. So I haven't seen much of the observatory. I've seen a lot of Edinburgh, so that's the good thing, that if you work at home, you can at least decide whenever you take a break and just have a stroll. I'm currently staying downtown in Edinburgh, so it's very easy for me to explore all the sites in Edinburgh. And I really, really enjoy it. So I think Edinburgh is great, but I'm very much looking forward to kind of meeting people in person. Having Zoom meetings all day is not really replacing just having a coffee and like we have a chat now. It would be much easier to just sit down and have a coffee and a chat in the institute rather than doing that via Zoom. You can't really get to know your colleagues via 1 hour Zoom meetings each week.
Coming back to your research, what do you think the next big thing is going to be in cosmology, and more specifically, I guess, what you do that is going to impact not necessarily just your area, but maybe the wider field as a whole, or even sort of beyond that?
The good aspect of cosmology, and what I thought was much more appealing than, for example, particle physics, is that there are heaps of open questions, which means there's heaps of potential breakthroughs. Let's say a safe bet is that we will make progress on measuring the mass of the neutrinos. So neutrinos are some of the lightest particles in the standard model of particle physics. And interestingly, studying the universe as a whole can teach you something about the mass of these particles. So far, we haven't actually been able to measure the mass of these particles in particle physics or in laboratory settings. But studying the universe as a whole is sensitive to that particular quantity. So we can measure this fundamental property of one of the particles or one of the elementary particles in the standard model of particle physics using the universe as a whole. And that should be expected to happen in the next couple of years. So that's a breakthrough, which I think is very, very nice, because it really means that cosmology can contribute to the standard model of particle physics, and it just shows how these different areas in physics interact with each other.
With these sort of bigger questions that seem to be potentially on the horizon, so for example, dark matter, dark energy, this is probably not a particularly scientific question. Do you have any that in particular you find sort of quite exciting, quite the prospect of having it solved just really gets to you?
Yeah, so my focus these days is on studying inflation. So inflation is the very first phase of the universe. Basically, it describes what happened directly after the Big Bang, and understanding inflation should tell us something about what Big Bang actually means. So what is the origin of the universe? So far we have many theories for inflation, but we can't really distinguish between them because the data is fairly poor. So there will be a lot more data sets in the coming years, which should tell us about or should at least constrain the model space for inflation. So that should really tell us something about what the properties of inflation are. So there's a lot to learn there about what is the origin of the universe. And I think that could have a huge impact. Again, there's no direct path to the solution because it's not that we have two models and we just need to get our error bars smaller to distinguish between these two models. There are about 1,000 models, and many of them have so much freedom that it's very, very tough for experimentalists to constrain those. But again, I think if we detect something, some sort of property, some sort of feature of inflation, that would be a gigantic breakthrough. So I'm very, very hopeful that we will learn something in that area in the next years with the new data sets.
So sort of moving on to, I guess, beyond research and maybe your career as a whole, you've already briefly mentioned moving about and going from sort of particle physics to cosmology, and we've sort of gone how you changed institutes and stuff already. Is there any part of this path that you've taken, so from undergrad through your postdocs, that you've particularly enjoyed, not necessarily just as a matter of enjoying it, having fun, but potentially that you found sort of more fulfilling in different ways?
I think the PhD is a very special time because you get kind of, for the first time, you get confronted with a problem which you, in principle, have 3-5 years to solve. So you really have the chance and just spending your entire day digging into these problems and kind of slowly become an expert in the field, and then just move towards the solution of that problem. And every little step you're taking towards solving the entire problem is just amazing. So I really noticed that during my PhD, it's amazing how you get out of bed and just so eager to just get to your desk and working on this problem which you left off in the evening the day before. So I really felt like having this time to dig down on one particular problem during PhD is very special. So I really look back at it now in fondness, given that at some point you more become in a sort of a manager. So these days I'm guiding students in solving their projects and their research, and I also have a postdoc now. And of course, as soon as you start managing grants, you have a lot of admin work. So I'm looking at jealously to my PhD students who have all the time now to work on real research, while I try to kind of get an afternoon every now and then to work on my research. So yeah, the life has changed a lot, but to be honest, I like managing people a lot as well. So the work changes, but it's not that I completely that the work now has that I resent the work now or anything like this. I think it's it just changed. And of course, the good aspect of what I'm doing now is that I'm not digging into one particular problem. I just have meetings with 5 students or postdocs a day, and then I work on 5 different problems. So it's a lot wider, and you have a lot more things to think about. So it's a lot more flexible. So there are also many good aspects to it. So yeah, I think the entire career in academia was all appealing in all aspects. So otherwise, I think I am open-minded enough to just jump ship as soon as I don't think this is not what I want to do anymore. So far, I think all aspects of the academic life are really interesting to me. So that's why I'm still here.
As part of that, you mentioned, like you said, you really enjoy your sort of focus of being a PhD student, focusing on this one problem, and also now you're supervising PhD students. So from both these points of view, is there any particular piece of advice that you maybe you've received over your career, or that you've sort of developed through your career, that you'd like to give to PhD students, potential PhD students, sort of anywhere around that?
Yeah, so I think the key is really that that you find what you're passionate about. So like I mentioned, I changed directions many times, and you should really embrace change. So the fact that you found this particular area not not that appealing, that's a good thing. So in research is really, if you work on one subject and then you change in a different direction, that's just something positive, because you broadened your horizon by just knowing more than others. Because if you just focus on one field, you follow the advice of one professor who told you that this is a good subject, and then you just stick to it for the rest of your career, that I don't think is a good approach. So you should really find something you're passionate about yourself. As you know, a PhD is a really tough going, so it's a tough time. So you have to do a lot of work, and it's so much easier that if you get out of bed in the morning and you're just eager to work, that's the right mindset to do a PhD. Because if you have to force yourself to work on a certain subject, then a PhD can be really hard going. So I think my job these days with PhD students is really to find what they're passionate about, and that has nothing to do with the research I want to do. This has really something to do with the research the PhD student want to do. So finding the subject and then sticking to it, and that's a really difficult thing to do. And I think that's what you have to do. And during a PhD, you have to kind of find your passion. And if you're not doing this, then I think the academic career can be really, really tough. So embrace change and try to find something you're passionate about and keep an open mind.